I'm JJ Perez from Inside Runner Sports. Greg Luca, San Antonio Express News, a special midweek edition.
We're like behind enemy lines or whatever, like
right in front of the actual triangle of toughness at UTSA's race facility. Greg, the Roadrunners are midway through the 2022 regular season schedule. They're 4-2, 2-0 in conference play. I want to ask you a couple of questions about each of the units, but just overall, what are your big thoughts on this season so far?
Well, it seems like they're right where they should be.
Yeah.
We knew the non-conference schedule was going to be
brutal,
hugely challenging with Houston, Army, and Texas on there. And if they got out 2-2, that was, probably about the average result or what you would expect. And then winning two, actually pretty pivotal conference games the way it works out. Middle Tennessee seems like they're kind of middle of the pack in the league, so if you have to go on the road and face them, then that's a losable game in a lot of cases. And then Western Kentucky being a championship rematch, they were picked to finish third in the preseason. That's another one that you would think is kind of more in the marginal range, whereas some of these seem like more, I don't want to say certain wins, but a lot of them are going to be more favorable for UTSA, then that was probably like a 5-point spread by the end of it. So to have two critical wins under your belt, and now you head into FIU, which should be a very, very winnable game, potentially be 3-0 in the league. And the crazier thing is probably the way it's worked out, where UAB's already lost, and there's like North Texas is the only.
There's no gauge on this conference so far. It's crazy.
North Texas is the only other team that's at 2-0. So theoretically, the path to the championship game is already kind of opening up for them if they can just kind of beat the teams they should beat, and then even if you slip up once, you're probably still in the mix.
Yeah, I wrote this past week somewhere that they're in strong position to at least be in that championship game.
It's so weird. Like, I was writing it after the game that this is a huge early step if you want to repeat as conference champion. It feels like it's too early in the year to say that, but I don't think it is.
You can't win it here, but you could lose it at this point of the season. And one of the things they've battled, and we've both documented this as well as we can, all the injuries that they've sustained. And I think even yesterday I asked Coach Traylor about, is it all bad luck? Is some of it, are there other factors? And we could break it down. 5 offensive tackles. I think another offensive lineman, a few defensive linemen. Those are the kind of the nuts and bolts of the team, and that's a dire situation for the offensive line.
Yeah, I'm not sure it's too incredibly complicated. They had the most injuries right after they faced Texas, and that's going to be a more grueling kind of physical style of football. And other than that, I don't know that it's been too out of the ordinary. Having 21 guys on at that time is a lot, but the probably overall number might be about what you would expect for a season. But the issue has been the concentration all within single units. First it was still it's the offensive line to have 5 tackles who are out of the mix, and now you're starting to see some of that attrition on the defensive line as well. And it seems like on defense there's at least still, Jeff said there's still 9 guys that they can rotate, so that's 3 groups of 3, which is exactly what you're looking for. But the offensive line, it continues to be a question. And just when you think Mekhi Hart is going to come back and be good to go, somebody else goes down in that game, and then eventually it's him going down. And I was like, I guess it's like a 1-in, 1-out system. Right. Like, that's the best you're going to do. And it was even worse than that, because he's lost Terrell Haynes for a stretch of the game. It sounds like he's playing hurt. And Bentley Tafu, who's kind of emerged as a reliable left tackle in a very shocking sort of way, given that
sounds like he's hurt too.
Yeah, it sounds like he wasn't even going to move from guard if everything went according to plan. And now not only is he at left tackle, but he's performing well. So. And then, of course, he gets hurt. When you cross that hurdle of adjusting a new player to a new position and start to get the kind of production you're looking for, immediately he's down. So it was interesting that he missed. It looked really bad when he was coming off.
I thought it was. But he came back.
Yeah, so he missed half the second quarter and half of the third quarter, I think, and then just suddenly he was back out there. So we will see to what extent he's able to go this week, because he did seem pretty hobbled in that game, and so we don't know if it gets, if it stiffens up or if there's some kind of issue being able to get through this week.
I think I heard Jeff say something somewhere yesterday. He's a game time decision, so that would be the 5 tackles he's referring to that are outlets. I don't know if I want to go through every single position.
Mekhi's the 5th one, right?
Yeah, Mekhi, Vendley, Allen,
Payne,
Ernesto.
And
there's an interior guy down.
Yeah, I guess you're right. I thought there was more than that. I shouldn't have derailed your video. Anyway, go ahead.
No. So that the injuries are certainly, I guess, the key storyline this season. But I don't know if I want to talk about every single position on the team, because I don't want this video to go on for hours. But let's kind of grade how some of the positions have gone. And I mean, we'll start right there at the offensive line. I mean, the last 2 games, they still put up some big rushing numbers, the biggest of the season. But I think a lot of it, too, is Frank Harris's decision-making in the RPO. So how would you grade how the offensive line has played so far?
Yeah, I think a lot of the success that you see on the offense is a coaching thing. I think they've worked around it. Frank Harris's time to throw has been really low. They haven't worked much of the deep passing game.
Right.
So we don't have
it's all been intermediary, short
so
routes.
they're kind of adjusted around the fact that they're not going to have a lot of time because the protection's not going to hold up. And Frankie Martinez is in a tough spot as a walk-on, playing right tackle and trying to hold up against some of the pass rushers he's faced. But the bottom line is that he hasn't been able to create the kind of protection that somebody like Mekhi Hart can. So it's hard to give that group a super high grade, because even though you probably want to, because from what they've dealt with, they've held up as well as anybody could expect. But just like in a vacuum, it's hard to give it higher than like a C+ or a B-, I think, because that's where there's been people have had the ability to target them, and the rest of the team has been forced to work around some of the deficiencies in that group.
Yeah, I think a B-, C+ is fair. What about the rest of the offense? Frank Harris is putting up some big numbers.
A+, whatever. Something really high. He's been crazy productive, and never would have thought that he would be leading a pass-first offense like this. That a week ago was at the top of the NCAA in passing, and for him, I believe, to still be the leader
total
in
yards,
total offense. Just crazy the level of production that he's able to come through, and a lot of it seems like every game he misses 1 or 2 throws, and that's not really to knock him. It's just to say that it's crazy how productive he's been, and it feels like there's still another level he could go to if they tighten up a couple of things here and there too.
Yeah, I don't think the completion percentage is quite where they want it to be, but I mean the numbers are there.
Yeah, because there's just been so much of that short intermediate stuff, and you can count on the receivers group who just give them an A+ right off the bat. Obviously, that's not really surprising, but you knew you were getting something special with that group, and they delivered.
There were some serious questions about the run game at the beginning of this season, and I think a lot of that had to do with the injuries to the O-line and the opponents they were facing. But it seems like, especially last week, the 1-2 combination of Brendan Brady and Traylon Smith has the potential to do some damage in this conference if they can stay healthy.
Yeah, I don't think we've seen the best version of Traylon Smith yet. I think there's still some room to make up with that ankle injury, and Jeff was just telling us a few minutes ago that he's not practicing. Just trying to get him to and through the games on a week-to-week basis. So I think there's still probably some room to grow there if he can get fully healthy and then produce. And I think actually, especially the last couple of weeks, Brendan Brady's probably been able to do more with his opportunities than I would have expected, just based on the level of talent that I kind of perceived him to be at. I feel like he's been able to make some things happen or rumble for some extra yardage after first contact in these last couple of games, and it seems like that's another guy where if you were able to keep him fresh as Traylon gets more and more healthy and kind of takes a larger chunk of the carries, then those two guys could be pretty potent. Yeah, I think it worked out pretty well. I wasn't sure what to expect of that group, like you said.
I think also Brendan Brady's action out of in the passing game, out of the backfield, especially last week, was pretty important.
Right, and I thought that was going to be more Trey's kind of role in the offense. He seemed like he had more of a pedigree for doing that, but they're both really capable in that regard.
Let's jump to the defense. I want to group kind of the front 7 together. How would you rate those guys? Because they've certainly had some struggles, especially early on. I mean, the Texas Southern game wasn't great by any means, but I mean, they seemed to be okay last week against Western Kentucky. So it's kind of a mixed bag.
Well, I would say prior to the injuries to Brandon Matterson and Joe Evans and what they just saw, Zach Causey went out. I don't know how much of a difference that really makes in the grand scheme of things, but Matterson especially was one of the standouts of that group, and
he was a difference maker.
I felt really good about the defensive line overall because of his strength and what some of the other guys have brought to the table, and to be able to have a guy like Joe Evans as maybe on your second unit. Some of the other guys you can rotate through up front. I thought that group had been really potent, but the ability to rush the passer, which is not always something that falls on the 3 down and a 3-4 front, but I just don't think that's been there at the level it needs to. And they've schemed up some stuff to try to create pressure. I know Stacks isn't the be-all, end-all number, but I think they're near the bottom. I think they only have 7 for the year. And it just feels like the quarterbacks aren't necessarily under duress a lot of the time. I just don't think they're able to generate that kind of pressure there. And Jamal Ligon and Trevor Harmonson are solid. They've been there for a long time, and they know what they're doing. They're not. There's been 1 or 2 times where where me watching it is like, it seems like you're not necessarily in the right gap and you're giving it, but I don't know what the call was or whose fault it is really. So, it's hard to grade anybody from that perspective just because you don't know whose fault any given breakdown is. But I think those two guys are, solid, maybe not spectacular, but solid, and they're reliable starters in the middle there. So front seven group I feel pretty good about overall, but you want to see whether it's Trey Smith or Jamoria Robinson or even Daedre Taylor kind of getting involved as more of a pass rusher. Obviously, Day brings a lot to the table in other parts of the game, but that pass rush just hasn't been there. And so, as listed as one of the starters, outside linebacker, at a certain point, that's something that you would expect him to help offset as well.
The secondary, a lot of talk coming into this season about all the added players, the depth. I mean, it may still end up being the most talented group.
I think that's fair.
How have they performed? It's also kind of been a little bit up and down this season, right?
I feel like Corey Mayfield's been really, really impressive.
Yeah.
It's like very cliche, but he just gets better every year.
Yeah.
From the first time he was thrown into the fire against UAB and gave up a couple touchdowns, and it was like, this is a rough spot for this freshman to be put into, a struggling team that's way overmatched on the road, and then that did not derail his career in any way.
Yeah.
He just kept getting better and better, and this year it seems like, I don't know if this is, maybe I'm just noticing it for the first time, but it's like the athletic component seems to be at an even higher level.
The speed, too?
Yeah, where it's like nobody,
better?
like people aren't really creating separation from him, and he's able to recover to make plays as well, and it just feels like he's been really, really solid. And I think, we were just talking to
Nick Fortune. I mean, he's been as good as advertised, right?
Yeah, there have been one or two times where it's like, okay, here's a missed tackle, but he'll make 4 or 5 other open field tackles that are really impressive and you don't expect the cornerback to make. And there's been 1 or 2 times where you see him on the wrong end of a pass interference call, but there's 80 other plays a game where you don't think about him at all, and so that means he's doing his job because the ball's not near him and they're not finding openings to target him. So I think those two guys on the edge have been really, really solid. The safety play with Clifford Chapman and Rashad Wisdom, as long as Rashad's been healthy, he missed a game there, but I think you probably want to see a little bit more sure tackling, maybe a little bit less kind of lunging and coming up empty here and there, but they've both put up solid tackle numbers at the end of the day, and Rashad especially was around a lot of plays. Last weekend against Western Kentucky ended up with the team leading 10 tackles, so I don't think it's hard to complain too much about that performance. I think maybe there's just a little bit more those guys could be doing, whether it's coming up to make some sure tackles or even in the pass coverage part of it. There's 1 or 2 breakdowns in the back end, but generally I think the secondary is, I don't know if it's stronger than the defensive line. That's like a weird comparison to try to make, but I think those are 2 pretty strong units with a lot of options that they can rotate through.
Certainly the potential to get better as the season goes on, especially through the Conference USA schedule. What's your take on, we've talked a lot about the season recently about the tackling, and earlier in the season the penalties, and those are kind of 2 areas. And then you also, I mean, if you want to lump in forcing turnovers and having turnovers into this conversation, you can do that as well. But there's no fix to these issues, right?
Yeah, well, so turnovers, I think, tends to be very difficult to project and to understand. If there are turnovers in a game, is it because this team is good at that for some reason, or is it just something that happens randomly, whether you're falling on a fumble or whether you're coming up with the interception? But I think one of the predictive things that leads to that is rushing the passer. Like we just talked about.
You put pressure on the quarterback.
So you're not forcing the same number of mistakes, or you're not creating the same kind of panic that I think often leads to a lot of those turnover generating plays. So I do think maybe there is a little bit something to that, and that's the area that I would think that they would have to improve if they want to bring that other part of the game around. And you can talk about the way that you can tackle to try to get the ball out, but at this point, with how much we've talked about missed tackling, it's probably better for the focus to be on just the
gang tackle,
the simple wrapping up gang tackling aspect of it, since there's been some deficiencies there at different parts of the year. So I don't know that there's much to be said about either one of those. And then penalties is one that, every week you can look at the national rankings and say where they are in penalties, but if you go game by game, it's like they're even or even less than whoever they're playing against. So I don't know that that's been a real determining factor, and I think every team wants to play with 0 penalties the whole season, but there's going to be some of that. And what's interesting is it's been different types of plays. You'll get 1 or 2 personal fouls, you'll get 1 or 2 false starts. Early in the year, it was holding on Bentley because he was still getting adjusted, and I think a lot of that's been kind of taken care of. So those are like, you can go guy to guy of who's getting penalties and how they can improve it. Like Jamoy Robinson could start standing on the right side of the field a little bit more, and then that would eliminate 3 or 4 offsides that we've seen. So there's tiny things that they can tighten up, but I don't think that generally speaking this team has a penalty problem or a discipline problem.
I certainly don't think they're an undisciplined team, but they probably do want to cut out some of these mistakes.
It's just if you tighten up 1 or 2 things with 1 or 2 guys, the bottom line number looks a lot different, I think. And then some of these personal fouls, whether it's face mask or, I don't know that they've called them, there's like 1 or 2 where it's like, okay, here's a unsportsmanlike conduct, and then it's like, well, who instigated that?
They get the second guy.
I forget which game it was, but Jeff went through basically penalty by penalty, and
they were all questionable.
It wasn't like he was saying the refs don't know how to do their job, but it's just like, we disagree with all of these, and if the calls are
go
50-50,
watch it for yourself.
And maybe if you remove any number of those, then the number looks better. They're not so far in the red on penalties that it's like an obvious thing.
Yeah, I don't think it's as egregious as maybe some people think it is.
But it's an easy target.
Sometimes it feels that way, though.
Yeah.
Especially when you're in a relatively close game against Western Kentucky. Probably a little bit closer than it should have been,
There was that drive early against Texas that I think probably put it in a lot of people's minds where, if they don't have those penalties there's a chance they get off the field, and who knows what happens after that. So I think once you plant that seed, then anytime there's a penalty, it brings up that memory, and then people are a little bit more sensitive to that.
Let's talk about coaching. I want to talk about the coordinators. We've got a few first-time coordinators on offense, on special teams, and then the defense. What's your grade? Let's start at the defense. Jesslep is calling the plays. I think he called the plays last year.
Yeah, I don't know that it's much different.
Yeah.
There haven't been, I'm trying to think that, I don't know if there's been too many defensive calls that I had a really strong opinion on one way or the other, whether they should be blitzing or shouldn't be blitzing it. I think it felt like even last year, and probably the same this year, I don't know that they've brought pressure as often as they did the previous season, but I would have to see numbers on that to be sure. I could be just making that up. So generally I think he's done probably a fine job. I don't know that they've dialed up anything that I thought was too crazy or exotic, or that it put them in difficult situations. We talked about some of these substitution patterns, and whether it's a confusion about some down and distance or what the game situation is. Maybe there's been a couple of substitution things that you can pin on coaching, but that probably got cleaned up after the first couple of weeks. I don't think that that's much of an issue now either. So generally I would say that's probably a fine job. I wouldn't say it's a standout thing, but it hasn't been something I've thought about too much.
Jump to the offense. First year coordinator Will Stein calling the plays, co-OC Matt Maddox also working with the offensive line. I mean, those guys have done a great job.
Yeah, I loved getting a chance to talk to them about their process before the season, and maybe it's all coach speak or whatever, but it sounds like from the day that this staff got in, a lot of these same guys were in the room when they said, here's what we want the UTSA Jeff Traylor offense to look like. And Matt Maddox is doing the run game with help from Kurt Traylor, and then Will's doing the passing game, and Barry Lonnie was involved at that time, and Jeff probably has a say here and there. And they said this is what our offense looks like, and then each week in the meeting rooms they're saying, when these situations come up, these are the calls, and then when you get to the game and that's the situation, it's like just matching stuff up. There's like a little bit less of this creativity or having to pull something out of your pocket than I think a lot of people might imagine, as long as what they're saying is how it's actually playing out. I don't know, but it seems pretty reasonable to me. And I think the other thing I really enjoyed was I was asking about balance before the season, and what Will Stein said that I thought was really smart was like, balance is not that at the end of the game you look at the play sheet and you have as many runs as you have passes. It's that if you needed to be able to run the ball to win the game, you could do it, and if you needed to be able to pass the ball to win the game, you could do it. And it has not felt this season like they were unwilling to adapt, or that they couldn't adjust, or that the running lanes were wide open and they couldn't run through them. It was, we're putting up big passing numbers in this game because that's what's available, and we're going to put up big running numbers in this game because that's what's available. And so I think that the balance in that way is probably a lot like what they talked about and what they aimed for. And I think that the fact that they've been able to produce in both when the opportunity has arisen. I mean, when the passing game was there, they led the nation in passing. And when the run game was there, they ran for 200 yards. So it's that sort of thing where I feel like they've delivered on what they wanted to do.
Are you surprised some of the defenses have played UTSA the way they have? I mean, you just look at Western Kentucky; they almost dared UTSA to run. And a few of the opponents previous, it was the opposite. They're daring you to pass. So it's weird because they were still among the top in production and passing.
Yeah, you try to imagine, what it's like to be a defensive coordinator going against them, and you probably just look at early in this season, you look at last year and say, wow, they ran the ball quite a bit. Yeah. Let's take that away.
Yeah.
And then once you get to week 5 or 6, you're saying, wait, this team leads the nation in passing. Yeah. Let's take that away. So we've seen that kind of pendulum swing back the other way, and the UTSA's offense has reacted to it. So I think when you just think about how that process would play out from the defensive coaches on the other teams, it's probably not that crazy that they would end up with this kind of an approach. I don't know, did you expect that people would play them differently?
I do not. It's just surprising the numbers that are being put up. And I think we'll kind of see some of that tail off as the season goes, because it's a copycat league. I think some of these guys are going to make UTSA run and not let the wide receivers beat them.
Yeah, well, and we'll already see what the adjustment is this week, because they've shown that they can run the ball a little bit last week. So, yeah, I think the one thing that's going to be common is, like we mentioned, they're probably going to attack this offensive tackle position as much as they can. And
yeah.
It's interesting because it's like, do you want to attack that by blitzing, or do you say we don't need to blitz because we can attack it one-on-one? You know, right. So it's like, even something like that, different people are going to have different approaches to how to try to exploit it.
I don't want to pin all the grades of the special teams on special teams coordinator Justin Burke, because the whole staff actually does different parts of special teams. But what's been your analysis of the special teams? I know that that doesn't get a lot of attention until there's some errors, and there were quite a few errors in the beginning of the season, and it looks like they're turning the corner and cleaning some of that stuff up.
It seems like the way they structure it is that they don't want to burn a lot of freshman redshirt opportunities on special teams. So you don't see a lot of those guys out there, even though they might be better athletes or better
significant contributors who play offense and defense play special teams here.
But then when you start to get injuries, you don't want to use that guys in that regard either.
Yeah.
So your pool of people you want to use on special teams, I think, shrinks from both ends.
Yeah.
And you end up in some positions like with this kick coverage unit, which I think has been the biggest probably red flag, is that, you know, when they're not able to just kick it through the end zone, the teams have gotten some pretty good kick returns against them, and it might just be the available guys who they feel comfortable putting in that role. And maybe you'll see the last 4 games of the season when there's some redshirt opportunities that aren't going to be
throw some athletes out there.
Yeah, maybe you'll see a difference there, and maybe just as the group gets healthier, you'll see some difference there. But I think, you know, the first couple weeks of the season, I don't recall that being a big issue. So I think when they're at full strength and they have the guys they want out there, they're able to produce as much as they would want on special teams. And maybe even as you get late in the year, you feel better about putting your starters out there because you're, you know, more of a sprint rather than planning for the long term. So I think that it's been fine. I mean, you got the first kick return of the season. Jared Sackett missed a couple weird ones against Army, but other than that, he's been pretty solid.
Drilled one this last week,
And I don't think that, you know, Luca 10 is known quantity, and that's another one where it's like, well, I think he said on the radio show that they've kind of changed some things up where he's not necessarily always kind of trying to boom it down the field.
Yeah.
They're trying to do more, whether directional stuff or just stuff that negates the opportunity for a return. So you can't even look at the numbers there and compare, you know, what's his average this year versus last year, because it all comes down to what they're trying to accomplish. So I think special teams is fine.
Let's talk about the head man of UTSA football, head coach Jeff Traylor, reigning Conference USA Coach of the Year. Kind of as continuing the same culture, the same offense, the same defense, and I think he's got the program right where it should be at this point of the season. Do you agree with that? Yeah, we talked about, you know, I think he gets credit or blame for the different stuff we talked about already with the offensive and defensive system, so I don't need to rehash any of that. But I think in terms of if there's anything that happens week to week that we disagree with, a lot of times we'll bring it up in a media availability, and I don't think we've talked about too many of those. No.
There hasn't been a, hey, you know, third quarter, 4th and 2, you went for it and we didn't like that, what's up with, you know, that sort of thing. I feel like there's been a lot of really agreeable decisions, and I think times where he rolls the dice and it didn't work out that I think we feel good about. Probably, if there's anything that he might have got knocked for, it would be some of these, like, 4th down passing calls.
Instead of running.
I haven't personally had any issue with that. I mean, the plays have clearly been there. It's just been a drop or two that has hurt that from working out. And you understand why, with the state of the offensive line, that they aren't trying to run it into the defense on 4th and short. In fact, we saw them try that in this last game, and it didn't work out. When it was like late in the third quarter, they had a 4th and 1 from the 6, I believe it was, and they got stuffed. And so I think that generally the game management parts of this have been really good. There have not been any clock management issues, and certainly they've had a bunch of late game scenarios where that was really relevant. And I think those have been deftly handled each time it's come up. So I feel really good about the way he's kind of managed the game, and obviously the state of the program's in a pretty good space, just with everything we've talked about up to this point, with the guys at each position, the depth that they've been able to maintain. If you want to say maybe they should have 8 offensive tackles ready to go,
yeah.
You can do that if you want. I think that's probably a pretty tough ask. So generally, I think that the roster's been in a good spot and the game management's been in a good spot, and I think that's all you can ask from the head coach.
What's the overall vibe moving forward in this season? Obviously, the injuries are the most concerning, but I mean, you look at the rest of the schedule, and it's not. I mean, there aren't any cupcakes. There aren't many cupcakes left on that schedule, and like I mentioned earlier, it's hard to get a gauge on this Conference USA. But I mean, UTSA could run the table here.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, UAB is going to be a really tough game. I think UAB will be favored against UTSA on their home field, and it depends, what happens between now and then. Those things can change. I would have thought, not coming here, but there's a chance that Western Kentucky line could have been close to even or even. I mean, I think if you get into some of the advanced metrics that often play into the betting lines, Western Kentucky was pretty much comfortably ahead of UTSA until basically game week. Like whatever happened in that game against Troy, they dropped off in a lot of that stuff, and so suddenly it was a 5-point UTSA favorite thing. But I think UAB is going to have an advantage on their home field, like I said. But I do think when you get into a lot of the other games on the schedule, those teams do not rate very highly in those kind of
at least
metrics.
Not as high as UTSA does.
I mean, so but like FIU obviously is near the bottom of the country, and I don't think UTEP has a very good team. I know they've been competitive in certain games, and I don't think Louisiana Tech has a very good team.
Rice looks a little bit more difficult than.
Yeah, I don't think the bottom line with them is great, but when you look at the scores, they're all really promising. So maybe there's something that they're doing that allows them to be competitive in a lot of these games that you wouldn't expect. So yeah, certainly. I mean, you're the guy with they'll never beat all 3 Texas teams at the same time, right? Or whatever it is. So who knows if one of those is going to be a pitfall? But even like Texas, I don't think has a very strong team on paper. So if everything went to form, UTSA should probably, aside from UAB, they'd be a pretty big favorite in all of these games, I would think, unless I'm forgetting one. I think we rattled them all off.
No, I think so. Do we hit on everything? What's your take on the attendance? We saw 22,000 and some change last week, and the last home game. I mean, still leads the conference, which is the good part, but I mean, those aren't great numbers, right?
So I really would like to do a story on this, and what's interesting, and it's become a talking point this week, is how it compares to Texas State. Yeah. They were able to draw 25,000 for a team that honestly, was like floundering. Like I don't know how they got 25,000 people motivated to want to watch them.
Lots of marketing apparently. Or
suddenly they won that game, so it doesn't look as crazy as it would have if they lost. Like there's a chance all those people show up to watch them lose by 30. Like it could have played out that way just as easily, if not more likely than it is that they would have pulled off the win. So I don't really know exactly how to put UTSA's numbers in context, because you would think 22,300 or whatever it was is disappointing compared to Texas Southern. You would think you'd outdraw your FCS opponent for a conference championship game rematch. But
then you go back and look at some of the games last year, and it's more than that. So it's like you have a couple of outliers that change things.
It's weird because so you throw out the COVID year, of course.
Yeah.
Last year, you almost throw out last year because it's like this undefeated, nationally ranked phenomenon that's going to move people to a different level. And then if you go back to 2019, 2018, 2017, these numbers are better than a lot of conference games during that era. So it's a question of, how much is it reasonable to expect that the success of last year has built the program to a different level? And there is some basis to that. I mean, we're standing in this building they didn't have before, and there's this conference move coming up, which takes them to a higher level. There's the fact that they signed their coach to a 10-year contract. There's a different sort of commitment and level of football being played here. Even all the way down to like NIL, there's more of an engagement, I think, with the fan base and the community around here than with a lot of other schools in Conference USA or at a similar level. So it speaks to the idea that you would have this more engaged fan base. But I had found it really interesting. We were just talking about a tweet from Vinny Benzetta at Kent's 5, and you had one over the weekend that got a lot of traction. And Miles Benning, who used to play here, was tweeting about this, and Kevin Davis tweeted about it.
Everybody wants more.
So I've been in the replies and the comments on all this stuff. I really want to see like what people are complaining about. And so the tickets are $20 or $30, and when you add in fees, and if it's a family of 5, it gets pretty expensive. That's the case for anything.
Anywhere, I mean, like how much does a movie cost?
Right. Maybe you would wish it would be $25 or $30 cheaper. Like I guess anybody could wish that. I don't know if that's a make or break thing. Parking is inconvenient.
Not great,
Okay, there's 6 home games a year. Like, can you suck it up for 6 home games a year?
Make it an event and choose.
I was thinking a lot about this word, passion. If you're really, really invested in the program, then those things don't matter. And I'm not saying that to call out the fans. I'm just saying that what we've learned is that there's 20 to 25,000 really passionate people.
Yeah. And
I don't know,
like 10,000
like who are iffy.
Right. Yeah.
But it's like, if you're saying like, I didn't go to the game because Fluffy Guy wasn't, like, get out of here. Like, what does that have to do with, like, who cares? And I'm sure he's hilarious, but like, in major college football markets where you are a driver of your community's entertainment, that doesn't come up. You plan around what the football team's doing because they only want 6 games a year of your time.
Yeah.
So the fact that any of these things is like, oh, did the people go to ACL? Are they at the state fair? Like, the level that UTSA wants to be at is that they're the first priority.
Yeah.
And I think in a lot of places where people have really passionate college football fan bases, they look at the schedule and they plan their weddings and their birthday parties and their life events and everything else around that.
I do think it's kind of a combination of factors. Some of it is, it's like a flower. You gotta water it to grow, and you gotta be able to continually put in the marketing effort, all the stuff we see on social media, and invest actual financial dollars into it. And also some of it is San Antonio. It's a walk-up kind of town, a little bit of a fickle fan. So to me, it's a work in progress.
See, especially seeing this week, I put in, I want to get to the bottom of how much is UTSA spending on marketing versus how much Texas State spend on marketing, and what's kind of the expectation in that area, how does it compare to previous years and that sort of thing. And I think there is something to be said for just sort of being a presence.
Yeah.
Even if, something you put out doesn't immediately translate into somebody clicking on a link and buying a ticket.
Right.
You are now in their head, and it's just like you're a part of just the day-to-day mindset in the community, and you feel.
And in order to stay there, you got to keep doing it.
Right. It doesn't feel like something that's competing for your time. It's just something that's present and in top of mind all the time. So I think that there is something to be said for the marketing effort. I don't know how everything we talked about would help a little bit, right? Yeah. Like if the tickets were a little bit cheaper, you'd get a couple more people, and if the parking was a little bit better, you get a couple more people, and game day experience. There's been some chatter about like how many ads and stuff are they
in-game commercials.
But I think the bottom line is that it just comes down to how many people are passionate enough to deal with some inconveniences to be a part of the thing that they really care about. And if there's 20 to 25,000 people who care to that level, that's awesome for those people. And then I think the most encouraging part is, I don't know how many students are at the game. I want to try to get that number.
It's been packed.
But is it 5,000? Yeah. And if that becomes, you convert 10% of those into season ticket holders, you've got 500 more people.
Every year.
In 30 years, you have 15,000 more people.
Yeah.
And now you're at the level you want to be at. So I think the fact that the program is making strides is reflecting in that student attendance, which seems to be higher and more engaged than it's been previously. And that allows you to try to grow your base of people who are going to the games week to week. Now, are you ever going to reach non-UTSA affiliated San Antonio man to get him to be your...
It's still a huge Longhorn Aggie fan.
I just don't know if you can connect with the people who aren't otherwise tied to your university, that they want to rally around this team. But, like Northwestern in Chicago has not been able to say, we are Chicago's college football team.
Right.
There's a lot of talk about, I think they're like shrinking the stadium. And then I believe UCLA, the first week of the season, was the number one talking point of like they were drawing in the 20s, and that's a historic program in an enormous market.
Yeah.
And you can complain about weather or whatever, but they didn't have the same. So I have to look as well. Like, does every big city, like, what's the
big city?
Austin is the only like huge city with a college football program that compares to that level, that they are a fixture. A lot of otherwise, it's like a smaller college town where they have that level of interest. So there's so many different factors in play with this that I think it's a really complicated question, and that's why it's been interesting that everybody has their own different opinion, and it's been such a talking point on social media, and I've enjoyed reading everybody's thoughts. Feel free to
deep in the weeds there with the tweet replies.
Feel free to throw some more ideas out there, because I'll pay attention to all of it and try to turn it into questions.
And hopefully we get to talk to Lisa about this next week.
But I do think it just, the cleanest answer is just like how many really devoted, passionate people do you have, and I don't know what goes into growing that either. Like, I don't know that that's something that the program can intentionally target and try to do, or if that just happens over time. Like, you have to feel some sort of emotional connection and involvement in it. I'm not That's why I'm saying if this is not a lot of that might have sounded like a call out. Like I'm not calling people out. It's just an observation that this is how many people really truly care. And there's other people who are just less invested and don't want to put up with anything.
How do you get that better? I think that's the discussion everybody wants to have. So, well, Greg, I think that'll wrap it up. A super extended mid-season report.
Well, we owed them for the last 2 weeks.
Right.
So.
My schedule has been crazy.
Well, part of that's my fault too.
So thanks to everybody watching. JJ Perez, Inside Runner Sports, Greg Luca, San Antonio Express News. Thanks for watching.